Very good afternoon and very good evening and good morning for someone in different parts of the world. And we are in the middle of this COVID-19 pandemic and facing a unprecedented surge in India and other Asian countries. It's in a most difficult time, and I would like to start this meeting with a sincere prayer for the people who are suffering with this virus, and hopefully they all will get well soon and get back to the normal life. And I hope you all to join in this prayer for a moment of silence. Thank you. Welcome to NGO Committee on Mental Health, and this is one of the committee as part of the Congo, and we've been very actively organizing our monthly programs, advocating for global mental health, and today every month we have a program specific to the thematic areas. The month of May, we focus on youth and children's mental health. So as part of our monthly event, today we are organizing a COVID-19 and youth mental health, recovery and resilience through creative arts. We have a super creative and awesome set of panelists today to share their expertise and knowledge and some of the ways to practice at local and global level. And I'm very happy to welcome Anna Ortega-Williams, Assistant Professor, Silburn School of Social Work from New York. And welcome, Anna. And is a very close friend of mine. And Priya Dakshini and Sandana Pechai, Research Associate from Francis Xavier Bernard Center, Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. Welcome, Priya, to our panel.
Hi.
And then I have an awesome artist and art educator from New York, Carly F. Johnson. She's a super creative artist. We've been collaborating since last summer, working with youth in Bronx. So, and welcome Carly once again. And Mr. Pandian, a human rights defender from Madurai, India. And his work is very important in terms of documenting caste-based violences and sensitizing young people on human rights, child rights, and the positive mental health. That's very incredible work is going on that part of the world. And Miss Julie, our own intern, she's been doing excellent work in compiling our research pieces and addressing the issues at the member state level, which countries are prioritizing mental health, which are not prioritizing. And I'm quite excited for our presentation today. So welcome, Julie, and thanks for joining our session today. And I welcome all the participants who are joined today for this meeting. And I don't want to really take much of time, and I would like to kickstart our presentations. Start with Kali, and Kali has a very exciting workshop presentations for us to start with. Welcome, Kali, and then over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I am so glad to be here with you today. Thank you, Siva, for that introduction. It has been so fun collaborating with Siva over the past year and a half around positive mental health, camps for kids, and particularly in my context, just here in New York City. So I'm going to walk us through an activity today because I'm really all about having hands-on tools that you can take away and do with your kids tomorrow or today. And I know that this panel here today, I'm going to learn so much, y'all are going to learn so much, so I'm going to really trust and rely on my co-panelists to, give us the whole scheme of the conversation that we're going to be entering into today with COVID, youth mental health, and the creative arts. So with that said, I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully, I don't know, Siva might need to adjust this, but hopefully you guys can see this pretty well. So what we're talking about today, if there's any issues with seeing this, let me know, and I'll move the page around a little bit. So what do you see? I love asking youth and anybody that I'm with these questions, right? What do you see? What do you think about what's going on around you? So kind of my model of care around addressing mental health issues or challenges that my clients might be encountering is really to root us in art and creativity and in our critical thinking skills. So today I thought we could just start with kind of rooting ourselves in our context. So we're all in different contexts here. I know I'm in New York City. Some of us are in India. Some of us may be in different cities all throughout. So when we talk today, I'm encouraging you to think about your context, because that's going to be the context you're going to talk to your kids about. But one thing that we really have that we're all sharing here, right, is the impact of this pandemic, this collective crisis, this collective trauma of going through the pandemic. And so I come from a trauma background. I work in foster care. I came from a trauma-informed foster care position into a mental health position where I'm still working with kids in the child welfare system, children and families. So you'll probably get some trauma-informed information here. You might be familiar with this if that's your model. If you're into the brain-body connection, you'll see that happening here. But what my kind of model of care is really incorporating these different areas and talking about the intersectionality of them, and not just with my coworkers, with my colleagues, to encourage diversity, equity, and inclusion, but with my kids. And so this creative activity is a way that we do that. I hear a lot with amongst adults and even myself. I wonder, how do we talk about these issues of racism, of discrimination? How do we talk about the Derek Chauvin trial? How do we talk about police brutality that's occurring every day? How do we talk about this stuff? It's layered and it's hard, right? We talk about this. We find ourselves saying this often. So I was thinking, I was working with my kids, and when COVID hit, all of a sudden we went virtual, and I started to have to think about how can we foster these conversations, right? In the virtual space or with my young people, now that there's more of a consciousness around some of the issues going on. And so when I came into the room with my kids for a workshop, I started to ask them these questions, like, what are you seeing, right? What's going on in the world around you? And I was finding that all the kids were like, all this police brutality, this young woman who was killed while she was at a party, outside with her friends, and the police comes up and shoots her. I'm seeing all these things. Our kids are seeing what we're seeing, what we're talking about in the news, but they're saying to me, like, I just don't have adults really giving me the context for it, or talking to me about it, or showing me that they also, that they see what's going on and it's impacting them, maybe like it's impacting me. So what do you see this creative activity kind of came up as a way to sort of foster these dialogues? Because, in my experience, I'm a mixed woman who I grew up with a Black dad and a white mom, and I saw my Black and white family together all the time, right? There was no sort of bias or discrimination or making itself known in my family levels when I was growing up. But when I turned around, I went into the world, right? I saw my Blackness surrounded by poverty all over the place in Philly, where I grew up, where I saw, a really direct difference between my white brothers and sisters and my Black brothers and sisters and their lived experience. And I thought, wow, that's interesting, because in my personal identity, I've seen Blackness and whiteness not to be insuperior, one to be insecure and one to be superior, but I've seen them to be equal or equitable. And then I see in the world, right, that's not the case all around me. So in my experience, right, that was the case. And when we come into the art world, and when we can kind of foster these justice-oriented conversations in the art world, right, we offer the space for the in my experience of our kids, right, their personal identities to come out. And when they have that in my experience space in the art, we engage with that, we can engage them on the racial, social, cultural dynamics that are going on in their setting, around them, that the narratives that their personal experiences are entering into us and entering into. And I think so that's where this in our title, this conditioning idea comes from, right? We're seeing how we're socially conditioned, what our kids are conditioned to think. And one really big takeaway is that what I get a lot from my kids in New York City, my Black and brown kids, which predominantly make up our foster care system here in NYC, I hear them saying that Black equals struggle, or that Black kids, you can become a rapper, or you can become or you might be going to jail, or you might be an athlete, right? There are these sort of these social conditions, these routes that we've been conditioned to believe we go based on our social conditions. So we know this, right? We're kind of hip to this perhaps in our spaces. And what I like to encourage in this model of care for using art integration is just to head on engage with these spaces and then provide some more context, right? We're going to get into doing this ourselves in a second, but just like a little more to couch this in the conversation, right? When we have this creative space, like we're going to get into right now, we're going to have the chance to share our questions and our perspectives, right? We're also going to have some helpful context that's going to come in, right? And then we're going to be creative. And when we were creative, I love the creativity and the brain connection. I'm not going to get too deep into that, but it's a fun one. I encourage you to check it out. But that's where we really get to also understand how when we are creative, when we're actually being creative, physical act of creativity, getting those different parts of our creative brain moving, we're relaxing our body. We're actually, coming into a more relaxed state. That parasympathetic nervous system is working. And that's really important, right? We understand for our youth, or for anyone who's experiencing heightened stress or distress, like during the pandemic, right? Or during all of these changes for our kids as they go from in-person learning to virtual learning, and maybe having the things they needed to no longer having the things they needed, or to not having the things they needed before and to really seeing how they don't have what they need now, right? There's a lot of change going on for our kids. So they need, right now, just like us, those tools to help relax their body and help them also, enter into what else we can get out of conversation and in the therapeutic space, the tools that we can pull from there. So, we're coming, I promise we're going to get to this activity soon. But what we're seeing, is that when we learn that there's more to our story, I'm arguing that it's going to free up space for us to realize that there's more to our specific story. So for my kids, I want them to know that their experience in the world does not have to be what they've been conditioned to think it is, based on the systems that they've been a part of, or based on the way that they've been learned, but actually that there's an expansive way that they can enter into the world. And the art space, I think for us as professionals that we want to remember is when our kids get to know, get to see that there's more, what we get to do is connect them to community. We get to connect them to resources, and we get to put their voice out in the world. How can we do that? We can do that by sharing art. We can do that by creating opportunities for youth to showcase their art. And then connecting kids to mentorship, creative mentorship opportunities. So the mental health piece of this, it's very holistic in the way that I come about it, right? I'm like, I want to couch kids in community. I want to give them coping tools through art and writing and processing and thinking, creative thinking skills. And then I also want to hold them and their reality and affirm that and say, I see you. This is your lived experience, and that's not different or wrong or bad or whatever. Actually, let me enter in and meet you where you are, and let me help you maybe figure out the tools that might be helpful to get you where you might want. And that's really, showing our kids that it's not their fault that they're a part of, in my environment, systems, right? Because the foster care system is where I'm working, so I do a lot of that work with my youth. All right, let's go. This is context, which you kind of have seen. I want us to get into the activity because I want to be really mindful of our time. But what you'll see on this page are some definitions. Whenever I come into the room, whenever I do a creative workshop with anybody with kids, just like I spent some time giving us context to our convo today, I got to give that context to my kids, right? This is where we do the learning, we do the plug-in connection, and also when we have the context for what we're doing in the space together, or how we're perceiving or understanding reality in the space together, it can help it create a more safer space for people to engage, or a braver space. And so on this page, which I'm not going to spend a long time on, but you'll sort of see the things that we're exploring in this art as healing kind of mentality, the brain-body connection, the community work, and then the creativity in the brain. The creativity in the brain is specifically interesting when we think about the trauma model, right? Think about how trauma manifests itself. We think about our neurological pathways and how sort of what we practice, we see becoming more of a habit. And so for our kids, I love the concept of us encouraging the practice of art or creativity or writing or drawing or using, reflecting through these different modes, and also accessing these spaces of regulation and relaxation on the ongoing, because that's gonna create it's gonna become something that they can do more frequently, do more often as we practice. That it deepens that sort of pathway in the neurological brain. So creativity in the brain. I have a bunch of resources on here that I'll also share for people to do follow up thinking about it if they want. So in my world, we're going to get into our activity. Siva, can you give me a time check really quick? Oh, you're muted. Great. All right, so let's go to everybody who's on here, if you can or if you're able, no stress, pick up your phone or your laptop, and I want you to go to www.menti.com, and we're going to get into an activity, this In My World creative prompt that we can do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to share another screen so we can all engage in this activity together. So we're going to, you'll see the directions will pop up on here. Wow. You're going to go to www.menti.com, and you're going to use this code. The code is 15293277. So you can go to this on your phone, you can go to this on your laptop, and this is a free website. It's something you can bring up with your kids anytime. It's menti.com. So as we get on there, if you're having issues, technical difficulties, feel free to write in the chat. And I'm going to ask if Siva could keep an eye on that chat. If you're getting on here and you're okay, that's great. If people are commenting. So what we're thinking about here, we're going to respond to in a second, is what is your environment, the world around you like? We're going to use our senses and our feelings to think about that. So literally, you could look around and say, what's it like? What the houses look like? What stores are around? What are the people? Like what's going on? So I want you guys to do this with me. Let's plug in what your environment and the world around you looks like or is like. You can use sort of any words that you would like. And they should populate up here in the word cloud. But let me see if this is going to do what it's supposed to do. Are people able to type in there? People are getting on.
There's a thumbs up and a question mark. Which do we press?
Okay, perfect. So you can leave it there, and then I'm going to go to the next screen, and I hope that's what gives you the option. Okay. Here we go. And this might be where is the code different? 15293277? Or the same code from the previous page? It might not be. In which case?
It's the same code.
Okay, great. So on this page, you should be prompted to describe your environment in the world in short phrases or words. You can think visually, culturally, socially. Think what you just see, what you look around. You can put in as many words as you'd like here. And you can think locally, you can think specifically to the season, like I see here. You can also think really just expansively or generally. There's really no wrong way. So we see stuff coming up here. Love this. I'm gonna get in here too. Thank you everyone who's participating. All right. Cool. We're seeing a bunch of different words come up here. Interesting, laughter. I love that. Spring, peaceful, confusing. I feel that. Family. Sometimes unpredictable. Public housing. buildings, busy green. Okay, let's do a couple more seconds, put things out. Wow, a lot of things. Relative safety, shouts, crowding, sometimes unpredictable. Awesome. New leaves. So I want to reflect, right? So many things can come up here for people, right? We see a lot of different reflections across the board. And what I love in the creative space is that we're affirming everything that comes out here, right? This is your space. This is our time to just do our own reflection, to think about what's coming up to our mind, and to find that to be valid, right? And we're encouraging that our kids be exploring and thinking in these creative spaces. Okay, so we've got, I love it, incongruence, dog smell. I hear that. Bursts of noise, overconsumption. Okay, so now when we take this sort of justice lens to, maybe it's a little hard to see, I'll make it a little bigger. Take a justice lens to things. I might ask a child to talk to me about some of these points, right? Let's think about it. Let's think about what we see here. You're seeing this. So now I would ask, okay, so with what you see, I'm wondering, what do you think? What would you change? What would you do differently? Or if you were to design, right, your world, what might that look like? And so for today, if we have a minute, we might spend a minute doing that with ourselves, right? That would be, I'm going to stop this share and bring to the next slide. Thank you, everyone. I know this is a quick move through things, but we come to this next step. We get creative about it, right? We think, if you could design, create, like I was saying, add to the world around you, what would that world look like or be like? Let me see, the chat is moving here. So, what would it be like? And then we would draw, we would write a poem, a story, I would say, draw a picture, create a comic, write a song, make a note, whatever it is. Create something that starts to think about what it is and use the materials around you. So today we didn't necessarily get into this creative activity. So I thought I wanted to give you an example of what is generated sometimes from kids from these sorts of these dialogues. And when we enter in, we get to think about, our different, what's going on in our mind, and we come in, we provide the context, like I sort of did in the beginning of our time together. Different things can come of it. So I wanted to read you one poem to close our time, and then open it up to our next presenter. So, and can you guys see my screen right here? It says art advocacy. Great. So this is a little bit of the stuff that comes out of the art advocacy spaces that I'm doing with my kids. That's some sketching, but I really wanted to look at a couple of these points. We see this is a client, a 14-year-old. She's thinking about what she sees around her going on a lot. And she talks about it in comics, and then in the text, she thinks about and in part of sharing this, she wants to create dialogue around what is often not talked about, including sexual harassment is up here as well, and behind the fake smiles. And she wants to share this with people so that they know that they're not alone, and also to encourage people to be talking more about their experiences with this, to normalize the need also to get help. And then the last poem, I have Siva, stop me if it's time, but I thought this was really powerful because, we have a time to vote coming up for our kids. So I'll encourage you to get some creative time going before voting, maybe to encourage the kids to vote. So I asked our kid to talk about kind of their world and the voting coming up. And she wrote, on this, my 18th year, I'm asked to vote. White man versus white man. Where's Obama when you need him? I really don't want to. In my eyes, it's just another waste of my time. They don't want us to vote anyways. They just want us to go. I will vote, not just to be spiteful. I will vote because it's my birthright. Besides, is it really gonna hurt? I can be an artist and vote. Charlotte did it way back when Black and white women were two different things. Back when female was only associated with kids and a ring. Back when Black was a burden and not a crown. Back when Black women were meant to be seen, never to make a sound. Mary Ann was a lawyer. I will be held to her standards and her standards only. And voting is one of those. I want to go down in history. It will read, Charlotte, you trailblazer, Harriet, you strong Black attorney, and Charisma, you teenage voter. So going to leave you with that, because, you know, what we get to see with a takeaway of a creative piece like that is, hey, how can I help plug that girl, that young woman, into experiences so that she can be that trailblazer that she wants to be. So thanks for listening, y'all. And I hope that there's some takeaways around the creative end that feel accessible to you and your community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Carly. It's a wonderful presentation. And I think the participant might be having like so many questions.
Yay.
So if you have a questions, either you can chat, put it on a chat window, or maybe keep it at the end, and maybe like Carly can answer to those questions. And thank you so much, Carly, like connecting the mental health and social justice and racial equity. It's like if without addressing the social justice, I don't think there is a positive mental health can be attained. So I think that's very, very important, and how we can use the creative arts as a tool for exploring identity and addressing the social justice within and outside. Thank you so much, Carly. And yeah, let's move on to the next presenter, Mr. Pandian from Witness for Justice. And he's in the midnight now, almost, yeah, it's 12 plus. And he's here to share some of his social justice work using a creative art for positive mental health. And welcome, Mr. Pandian, and I'll share your presentation for you.
Thank you, Mr. Siva, and thanks to the organizers, NGO committee, for giving this wonderful opportunity to share my experiences and the travel along with human rights and the creative art to ensure the mental health for the children and the youth. And also my warm welcome and wishes to all the panelists and the participants on this important, the online seminar. And also very special thanks to Carly for setting the ground of, the importance of the art on achieving social justice and also the racial equity, access to entitlements, and the advocacy. So my presentation is almost, a continuation of Ms. Carly within Indian context. So I have been working on human rights, especially addressing the caste and caste-based discrimination and exclusions of children in the educational institutions. So very often we found the children, the Dalit community, who are often excluded from the educational institutions, and they are ignorant by the teachers and the peer group. And many of the time we witness the children had undergone a severe trauma when they witnessed mass violence and mass caste atrocities taken place in their villages and the respective places, which never been addressed by the the institutions or the healthcare systems in our country. And therefore, this is very important area we need to work intensively. And also we see that how creative art can help strategically to bring mental health among the children and the youth. So friends, I just give a brief introduction about the caste system in India, because many of you know well, but I just wanted to, run through a, very short data. I just wanted to mention that this India's population, 40% are children and the youth. If you take is a mass, population among 50% of the population of children from the Dalit community. So they call so-called untouchable community. So this is a very latest census of the country, 2011. 200 millions of Dalit population in India. They were, historically denied all the fundamental rights, equality and dignity by the caste system. So very unfortunate in India, caste determine everything. Caste determine the socio-economic political status of Dalit in India for more than 3,000 years. We have our own constitution, which guarantee the right to equality before the constitution, and everybody treated equal, despite the discrimination and inequalities continue as very strong illegitimate forces following the religion and the other belief system. And a very, disgusting part, the caste is an instrumental of perpetuating inequality or reinforcing inequality. And caste is a major factor sustaining the collective stigmatized memory. And also it always bring or build a collective memory which so much impute and stigmatized kind of memory for the Dalits. And that results a kind of larger ignorance by the mainstream community and also larger exclusion of the Dalit community. I said, caste always imposing a collective trauma, the literatures of the caste and the system and the practice, always imposing kind of a collective trauma among the community. It makes the community so inferior and also underprivileged. This is more on a collective victimhood because there is a lot of violence taken place, a lot of atrocities taken place. People are murdered, people are raped, and the villages are looted. So it built a kind of collective victimhood among the community. And the caste is always enforcing a collective oppression. So this is a very oppressive factor which was not addressed in the country, which was not addressed by the educational institution, which is not addressed by the healthcare systems in our country. Therefore, with our 18-year experiences of addressing the caste and the human rights issue, then we found how do we bring the inclusion or how do we bring the space for a social dialogue with the other community? How do we break the prejudice, which prevails for more than several generations? So we found art is one of the important tool which can, create a space for a dialogue and, create a space for, communication of different groups. And therefore we chose an art as one of the important medium, especially to take this teaching among the children and the youth. And very unfortunate, in India, art also very closely associated with a kind of impurity and stigma. And we can see how human are differences by the caste. Similarly, the art also, discriminated by the system. Like, particular section of the people, they have their own traditional art practices. For example, beating of drum, like, this is a main cultural identity of the Dalit community, which always stigmatized. Whereas the classical music, the same drum in different ways, that always very much accepted and mainstreamed in the society. So therefore, we thought, we to build a counter narrative by the stigmatized identity. So we use art as a weapon for the liberation, and also we use art for a tool for inclusiveness. As I said, caste, survivors, their trauma, which is not addressed so far in India, including the victims of rape and the victims of murder, discrimination, hate, so many issues. The survivors, the trauma was not addressed properly, and it always ignorant space in Indian, healthcare or mental health system. This is a very, present time. You can see the anxiety and the trauma was exposed in the mainstream media through cinema or the poetry, and there are some narratives which started now. And so now the caste traumatic experiences, it's become a debatable issue in India. As I said, there is no available mechanisms to address trauma of the caste survivors, especially in the schools and colleges and the university. They have a kind of social inclusion center which address the discriminatory experiences when the Dalit or the so-called untouchable community students are when they face. But almost all these, the system is defunct in the institutions. So in this background, we found we are also working among one of the important special group in India. They were notified as a criminal tribe by the British colony in India. So the criminal tribe identity was denotified by the Indian government after the independence in 1949, but still the stigma is continuing on this community. So the adult, the youth, and the children, they looked at as a branded criminal or habitual offenders by the mainstream community. So the children facing a larger exclusion in the schools, and the youth, facing a larger exclusions in the mainstream society. So the children never, have a habit of laughing because they witness a lot of police violence and the tortures, the police brutality when their parents, had undergone in the lockups, in the legal detentions. Therefore, we use the art pedagogy as a tool for, addressing their very deep-rooted trauma and their pain. So we formed the Children Resource Center in the villages. So the Children Resource Center is a place where we conduct kind of workshops on drawing and painting, photography and video making, storytelling and story writing, and performing art theater, including music and also play drum. This is one of the cultural, the art for the so-called untouchable community in India. And also we created a stage for children where they can, explore their creative skills and the potentials in a public sphere. And also we found this one of the important place which enables space for a social dialogue. For instance, I would say, uh, the neighboring community never enter into a Dalit village. So far, this is for a generation. They know each other, but they never enter into that particular village. And the children from the non-Dalit community never interacted with the Dalit children in the same village. But when we started the art workshop in the Dalit village, where the Dalit children started painting and drawing, and they performed different performing art, which was attracted to the other children, belong to the non-Dalit community. So it was a moment the other children got entered into that village, and they started watching it, and they started dialoguing with the Dalit children, which was not happened before for many years in that particular village. The adult started visiting that village to watch what the children are doing. So we found that it makes very sensible, and also it makes a certain significance of creating a space for bringing people together, and enable space for a dialogue with the different community. So art, it is a kind of transformative tool which bring inclusivity, and which also bring kind of public recognition for the children. And therefore the art is become very important tool in the children resource centers. And we have a culture in India, like every colors become very politically identified. For example, the color blue, we can say it always refers Dalit community. It become very political color. And if you say the saffron color, it always refers the Hindutva or right wing group. And the colors green always refers a kind of Muslim. So in the schools also, the children are wearing the wristband, which identify their own social group, their own caste group. So it was a kind of very well planned segregations by culturally, manifested in the schools, and the children got separated by using or identifying or locating themselves in different to the others. So it is a kind of expanding, kind of inequality or expanding segregations in the schools. Then we thought, how do we address this exclusion in the school. So we use the colors as a colors, and children have a different worldview when they look at the colors. But the adult imposing certain values into one color or certain political identity into the color. And we in CRC, we started teaching about colors as natural and how children look at the colors in their own world view. And from that, we started a kind of dialogue, and we started a discussion about understanding how it was politicized, how the colors used for polarization, how the colors used for differentiate different groups, different social groups, how colors used for discrimination, and how colors used for the exclusions. And children got understand, and the children very empowered, understanding this, the color politics going around. And these are the activity that we are doing in our CRC Center, Children Resource Center. So these are the children or the survivor children of the police torture, and their parents almost all in the prison for the false charges. And these people notified as a criminal tribe, habitual offender in India. But the children never laughed, together, and the children never, they come together. And this is a very first time the children, they come together, and they started painting. And this is another way of ensuring the collaboration and the co-creation on problem solving by using the colors. Yeah, go ahead. Photos. These are some of the activity that we do it to understand different things when they involved in making this the mask as a story, but it takes time actually to explain. But there are different activities the children, they are doing in the CRC centers. Go ahead. Next slide. So this is one of the yeah. So we do a kind of photography as well. The children are given a camera and they go around the village and click pictures, whatever they like it. And after the pictures, they describe the stories, why they taken the picture and how they connected the picture in their lives and how they looked at the picture. We always create a space for thinking and, to always bring them their submerge. And also, it always bring them their creative potentials to the outside. Go ahead. Next slide. As I said, the importance of the art, creative art that we used to make the children to feel they are important and they are significant of their existence, and also the coexistence in the society, because the children never recognize, the children always ignored by the mainstream community. So therefore, when the creative potential, proven or, understood by the children, they felt very significant of their self. So we found so much of witnesses doing this exercise. And also we found the art is one of the transformative tool, which, always helps to, transform the exclusion to inclusion. Because the children were ignorant in the school, they never participated in any of the activity. But after the CRC centers, the children capacitated in different creative art, and the children got recognized in the schools, and the children sent for competitions representing the schools because they are found very potential. So it is one of the kind of tool ensuring the inclusion in all the stream. Yeah. As I said, the children never thought of their self, actually, the creative power. And the CRC centers and the creative exercise that we facilitated among the children, it really brought out their creative power, and also it lead their self-directions as individuals and the collective. The collectives, as I said, it always making a collaboration and co-creation, and also lead for a problem solving. So this is what that we are doing in the CRC centers. The idea of the creative art which we facilitated among the children is to build kind of a counter narrative, in the mainstream society, because so far the narrative of this particular community is very distorted and very stigmatized and very prejudiced, surrounded this narrative. So the children here, we found they are the social transformers, and they are the creative agency which transform the society through their creative potentials. So the one of the idea is the children going to bring out a picture book, and they will go for a press conference where they address the experiences of the creative art, the exercise that they are doing, and also they are going to advocate for the right of their community. As I said, the children branded as habitual offenders, but the same children going to be a change makers, and the children are the agent of the community to advocate with the concerned authorities in the criminal justice system. So with their creative products, with their creative artifacts, they are going to advocate with the appropriate authorities in India. So that is the final the activity that we planned. So we found the art and creativity of the children is really, really, significant to bring a kind of generational changes in the community. The dignity which was denied for several generations, which is challenged by the children now through their art, creative art agencies. The children enable space for advocacy, and then the children, they are doing advocacy for access to entitlements, and the children creative agencies is going for claiming justice for the community. So this is what, very short time we found the creative art which is really helping among the children to build a counter narrative, and also contribute for the social transformation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Pandyan, for sharing this experiences from India, and then how the caste and race intersect, and how this narratives are like so much intersect with how the Western world operates on the race, and how the Indian subcontinent operates with the caste. It's a very, very similar, and it's impacting hugely on young people's mental health. And as I said earlier, if you are not addressing the social justice, and by using a creative art to identify and then build their self-esteem, and the creativity, as you said exactly, the creativity builds the self-esteem as well as brings the social recognitions to them, that builds their mental health, the positive mental health, so they can be grow better with that situation. I think you have brought a very important discussion today. I think we need to we have wait to discuss more on this at the end of the session. If you have participants, if you have any questions, save these questions or post it on the comment box, and we will keep discussing on that. And let's invite Anna. Anna's another important practitioner come academician. She is on the ground as well as on the academic space, fighting for racial justice through particularly the working with the Black youth, and bringing this narratives and conversation, and academically documenting the trauma care and work through her social work practice, and in teachings. So let's welcome Hannah for to take over the session.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Siva, for hosting this kind of conversation. It's actually so unique to have the foundation that you're laying about social justice being required for mental health. So Carly, I just appreciate how you open the space to be able to help us think through what is our conditioning and being able to help young people to have the space for us to move back as adults, to move back so that they can have the space and say, what is my experience? And Pandayan, for you being able to talk about memory, like for adults, we are offering particular types of inheritance to them that impacts their mental health. And so you spoke about stigma and exclusion, even where we co-opt the ability for them to have their own sense of understanding of what does blue mean to me? How does blue reflect a part of my identity outside of what has been imposed on me? So I just want to give such deep thanks to both of my colleagues who already shared today to help open the stage about what does mental health look like when there is space given for creativity and imagination. And so my work that I'll be sharing with you today comes out of my work of being a social worker for over 20 years in New York City. It comes out of my own personal lived experience of growing up here in New York in the Bronx. And also it comes out of my deep hope from talking with Black youth who organize, who are turning towards different social systems that harm them and are saying that there's something else that's possible. Something else is possible than what they are seeing in front of them. And so what I assert in my work is that young people can transform the conditions that are around them, and that is trauma recovery. And so I just want to take a moment before we get into the slides, before we go any further into the slides, I want you to take a moment, and you can just even hear my background, where I am, typical New York soundscape. I want you to take a moment and I want you to think, what does it mean to redefine destiny? What's one word that comes to mind? And put it into the chat. Redefining destiny. What comes to your heart? What comes to your mind? Put it in the chat. Let's see what's there. Hope. Thank you, Shanae. Freedom. Opportunity. Empowerment. Yes. Togetherness. Creating your voice. Yes, thank you. Imagination. Anyone else? A couple more. What does redefining destiny mean to you? Limitlessness. Yes. When I asked in 2017, I conducted a research study to better understand what does it mean to Black youth who are organizing? What does organizing mean to them? What features are important to their well-being? Not assuming that I understand. So I think that that's one thing. If we're thinking about mental health, it's first starting with the foundation that we don't know. We don't know fully what someone's worldview is and their deep experiences of being alive. So to inquire and to research and understand mental health, especially of young people who are experiencing marginalization and oppression, like we've already discussed, we need to ask, what does it mean to you? What does it feel like to you? And so that was my question. And what I learned from them, and I'll share when we go through the slides, the resounding meaning that I got from them about organizing as it related to their mental health, their well-being, is that they can redefine destiny. Organizing meant redefining destiny, which had an impact on their mental health and their sense of well-being. So we can go to the first slide. So we know, as we've said, that there are already so many pressing urgent needs that young people who experience subjugation encounter. So it's whether it's persistent and pervasive systemic violence that they face, whether it's disproportionate rates of being pushed out of schools, policing in their schools and in their neighborhoods, also being overexposed to environmental hazards and toxins. We have heard this story over and over again, and they interlock. How Black youth may be disproportionately exposed to harmful foods in their neighborhoods. So again, but Black youth are not only victims. We are not only, and I say we because I also identify as a Black, queer, cisgender woman who's also a scholar. So I am in the community and a research scholar practitioner. And so of this community, I use we throughout this presentation because also as a mother of a Black young girl, her destiny matters to me. And so a part of my questions are about also trying to imagine what the world could be like and trying to create questions that support the centering of Black youth voices so that we can hear more than that, the honking in the street, and we can hear more than what happens that's painful to them. And so Black youth have been organizing and fighting back and transforming systems and changing policies, challenging practices on the ground, in their schools, in their communities, in their neighborhoods, in their healthcare institutions, and in their community-based organizations, saying that they want change. And so adults, how do we respond to the harm that we see happening to them? We emphasize positive youth development. We want to develop their character. We want them to be engaged civically. We want to honor and understand their harm, the trauma that they've experienced. But also we are reductionistic often in our dominant paradigms. We look at young people as individuals with discrete harm that they've experienced. We often also have professionally driven services as the dominant thrust of how our work is delivered. And young people's voices are often marginalized in those settings. They are not decision makers or stakeholders in how they receive even their mental health care or how mental health care is designed. Also, how care is envisioned is within an institution within four walls, in my experience of 20 years of social work. Also, it's often oriented in cognitive oriented coping. How are young people going to think differently and behave differently? That's primary thrust of our work. We also do wish for and push for psychological and physiological relief, but often it's in the context of work that's apolitical and ahistorical. We aren't asking young people, what does it mean to you that Ma'Khia Bryant was killed? What does it mean to you that you look just like her or she looks like one of your best friends? This was a young person who was recently killed by a police officer. And so in not asking those questions, we are creating programs, we are creating models of mental health that aren't centered on the question of what would feel good to you. What supports you in your healing? How do you approach that when you're home with your friends? How do you approach that when you're with your family? How do you approach that in your own life and let that information drive our models of mental health provision and care? So I asked young people, what did organizing mean to them when they're taking a stand for racial and economic justice in New York City? I asked them what role, if any, did organizing play in facilitating healing and also post-traumatic growth. So the ability to not just bounce back, which is resilience, but to leap forward in ways that they hadn't even imagined. Not based on the traumatic incident, but how they made sense of it and they wove together their own lives. And also if there were particular features that had meaning for them. And so I interviewed 20 Black youth who organized from across New York City. And I also asked them to begin. So this is again, thinking about research as a creative endeavor. I asked them, what quote or image or song lyric or metaphor define your experience of organizing? So before we even got into a conversation about words, which we often are overly reliant upon as adults, I asked them about their context and to describe it in images that made sense to them. And so this is a breakdown of the young people that participated in my study. They were between 18 and 31 years old. The average age was about 25, 24. And it was a diverse group of Black youth. 10 identified as African-American, 7 as Caribbean, 2 as Afro-Latinx, and 1 as African. And there was also a diversity of genders. 10 were cisgender females, 2 gender nonconforming youth, and 8 cisgender males. And also they were involved in multiple types of organizing, but for the sake of time, I won't go into detail about the types, but they were involved in organizations and they also funded this work out of pocket. I just want to also really highlight that work. Or it was something that they did spontaneously as well as planned. So there was a range of experience from 6 months to 5 years of organizing experience among these young people. And some were in nonprofits and also political collectives and also independent without any affiliation. And so again, I audio recorded the interviews and then looked for the common themes using an interpretive phenomenological framework for my study. Long story short, I looked for the meaning and I looked for the essence. I looked for the feeling, something that lit them up and lit me up. I believe also in engaged research. So when we're in it, we are in it with them. We are inquiring with them. And so this is what I found. Again, the Black youth found organizing to be something that redefined destiny and generated a healed Black future. Let's sit for a moment. What if what was possible from their efforts as they turned to face the institutions that caused harm, what they were seeing wasn't just what was harming them. They were seeing a healed Black future right beyond them that they were pushing forward towards. That's mental health. That's a dimension of mental health that was really powerful for me to hear and witness. Also, that recovery from the violence that they were experiencing, not just contemporarily with the systemic violence that they were encountering in their lives, but also historically. This was a part of a historical pattern of violence that they have experienced based on collective identity, a mass group level identity. And so how they define recovery wasn't individualistic. It wasn't just about their own personal feeling of being better. Healing meant to the young people that I interviewed, it meant that a collective process and product was happening. And it came through in part through resistance. And so organizing, what they also shared with me, which I think is really crucial in the last slide, is that healing was also, thank you so much, Siva, for helping me with the slides. If we could go back one more. Okay, perfect. That organizing healed as a spiritual, energetic, and nonlinear experience. That was one of the biggest surprises for me. That again, we often think about even organizing in material change. But what these Black youth were talking about was that healing also happened because they got to think about their destiny. They got to think about changing energy in a place and transforming it. And that also added to their sense of well-being. And so again, the pathway to post-traumatic growth wasn't just through individual coping, but it was through collective self-care, which included social action. That was a part of how they approached their well-being, their mental health. And then lastly, that collective self-awareness and collective self-care had risk. It didn't always feel good to respond to a racially hostile climate or feeling like that climate was inescapable because it was on social media 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So it's just understanding that even though they felt compelled, they felt like it was a part of how they redefined destiny and created a healed Black future, there were still harms that they experienced in the face of that. So I have some additional slides, but I'll only go through 2 quotes. So I'll actually like to have 2 volunteers. Could I have someone read off one of these quotes? You can pick.
I'll read one. This is Shanae.
Thank you. Thank you, Shanae.
You're welcome. So I think that the reason why when we organize it can also be healing from that pain, from that frustration, is because we are with other people who have shared experiences and can understand what we're going through. 26-year-old, cisgender, queer, Afro-Latina, Colombian.
Anything stand out to you there, Shanae, that sticks with you, a word or 2 that sticks out to you about mental health?
Well, the healing from the pain. And I think that you do have to feel the pain before you can actually start to heal.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. And just again, knowing that feeling pain was about the personal pain that they experienced and the collective pain simultaneously, the collective and the personal. And so that was an important part of their worldview that I was able to understand in those conversations with them. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. And this will be the last slide. And so if someone else would like, please read off one of the quotes, one that stands out to you. And then I'll close.
I'll read one.
Thank you, Carly.
Wow, they're both beautiful. It's like in my lifetime, I know I'm probably not going to see anything change drastically or erratically. I might be able to do the little bit that I can, but I have all the faith in the world that somebody is going to come behind me and pick up the mantle. That's what being Black is.
"20-year-old cisgender straight male African American." Anything stand out to you from those words? Any word that stands out or 2?
Pick up the mantle. That vision to me really hit me in my heart.
That was probably one of the most surprising aspects of the study, was that Black youth in this study considered their ancestors as an important part of their resistance. And they across all 20 interviews, they mentioned directly ancestors that they felt that they learned from, actual like organizing strategies, ways to survive, and that some even use the word channel. They channeled their ancestors and channeled liberation, they channeled freedom. And so, and again, saying that I'm not sure if I'm going to see this. And I'm not going to know, I don't know if I'll see this change. At 20 years old, being convinced that you might not live long enough to see the change that you're working for, that's incredible, incredible pain. And the way that was transformed through organizing, that kind of pain wasn't fatalistic. It was transformative through the process of collectively organizing for a world that they believed was possible. And so I'll just end with that organizing is creativity. It is art. It is practice embodied. And if I could leave you with one last thing, it would be just trust that change happens when we can imagine it. And so as we can think about mental health and youth, and in particular for me, Black youth, thinking about how we can support, like again, I think of Pandian, how you created using art, and Carly, how you had space for art. Our young people need art so that they can imagine a different world than what they're inheriting, and knowing that they're also inheriting some of the resistance as well, and that's also protective for their mental health. So thank you for allowing me to be here and to share.
Thank you so much, Anand. it's it again, another powerful presentation, as well as we have like a lot more empirical evidences. We need a lot more empirical evidences to prove that, like, how identity and its related the mental health and trauma can be captured, and how we can put that into a practice. So the how we can have like evidence based or like a evidence-based practices or like trauma-informed practices can be inculcated or imparted with our own activities. it's it's important, like, that's what, like, it's very, very important to have like a person like you bringing uh, this perspective from the practitioners as well as from the academic point of view. That's very important and powerful, and thank you so much for presenting with us on this today. And I know that the audience may be having a lot of questions. If you have, save it or put it on a chat box and we can have it at the end. And without further ado, let's invite Priya Dakshini. And she's been like an awesome young research scientist working with ruggers, as well as with all the most of the like active participant in the NGO committees, and youth representative with UNICEF USA. So she's been very, very active and actively engaged in all the activities. And welcome, Priya.
Hi, thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity to begin with. It feels amazing and also a little intimidating because I'm the fourth speaker. I've now heard all this presentation, and some of the extraordinary work that they have done in this platform is really inspiring. But my presentation is coming from an academic and a research perspective. And also this particular topic is something very personal to me as well. A tool that I have used as a coping mechanism. So I have tried to, you will also see some of my drawings across this presentation in an attempt to make this presentation a little creative and fun. So let's begin. So we are talking about youth today. COVID-19 has definitely affected youth in a disproportionate manner, whether it's regarding social isolation or change in normalcy, and even the loss of employment and training to some, and just the uncertainty about the future have created a lot of acute and chronic mental health conditions, from anxiety or depression, whether it's sleep problems, alcohol and substance use, and even suicidal ideation. But as we saw from our previous speakers, that this is not just one challenge that the youth are facing right now, whether it's regarding climate change, or whether it's regarding systemic oppression or racism, or even poverty or migration, and the conflicts that is happening around the world has affected youth in a really drastic way. So there should be an holistic approach that we need to take that will address such mental health crises. So how do we exactly promote resilience and recovery? So in the panel today, we have chosen creative arts. So as I said, it's coming from an academic and research perspective. I think some of our previous speakers have laid that strong foundation, how this is being done in a practice. But I would like to a little bit go back and talk about the theory behind it. So why are we talking about creative arts and how it's that connected to resilience, right? So here you see the definition of creativity, which is the tendency to generate or recognize ideas, alternatives, or possibilities that may be useful in solving problems and communicating with others. And then you have the resilience as a concept, which is the ability of an individual to bounce back, showing more of an positive adaptations. So here you see some kind of a common theme between creativity and resilience, right? So the traits that are associated with creativity, such as flexibility, initiative, adaptability, spontaneity, and originality, are some of the traits that is strongly associated with resilience as well. So some people say creativity is an aspect of resiliency behavior, and some say creativity fosters resilience. So in the right, you're seeing the resilience Mandela, which is developed by Rowling, who said creativity is one of the 7 resilience that is developed across life stages. And there were a few studies that also explores a relationship between creativity and resilience. And one was the study conducted among Holocaust survivors. They reported people who engaged in art showed higher resilience compared to survivors who did not engage in art. So creative arts is a very broader category. So I choose one of the specific evidence-based intervention that uses creativity as a tool to improve well-being. So that is mindfulness-based art therapy. So we are looking at 2 terms, mindfulness and then art therapy. As some of you may know about mindfulness, which is a state of consciousness rooted in coming from a Buddhist philosophy that emphasizes 3 key components, which is being present in the moment, being aware to one's thoughts, feelings, and sensations, and being non-judgmental to one experience. And then we have art therapy. So art in general is a form of communication. So my first job experience in a special education school where I worked with children with special needs, I found art as a very powerful tool to communicate with them because it's a sort of expressing their feelings, their thoughts, and their desires especially for someone who cannot verbally communicate. They kind of use this art as a tool to express what they want to tell me. And when we are thinking of art therapy, we are using this art as a form within a clinical setting, especially for self-expression and reflection in a safer and a facilitated environment. So the main goals will be like meaning making or dealing with conflicting thoughts, relating to a trauma and problem solving skills, and even achieving an increased sense of well-being. So mindfulness-based art therapy, that's why uses art to expose yourself mindfully, and as well as it can be exploring your thought process, your emotional response, and what you're thinking. So it's mainly based on the mindfulness practices goals, which is to foster awareness, reinforce learning, and increase self-understanding. So most of the time it lasts for like 12 sessions, but it really varies according to the program or according to the community that you're serving. So there could be activities like draw a picture of yourself. Like I think we have seen some of the examples previously done itself, like what they are thinking about, what kind of a significant event that happened in their life, which can really lay out a very big conversation that happened. So here you're seeing one of the painting, or rather a collage that I did for myself. So it's basically, I cut small pieces of newspapers. So this particular piece took like a month for me to finish, like beside my work. So if I zoom out, you can see that those are all small cuts of magazine newspapers. And the background, it's actually made out of Tamil fonts, which is my mother tongue. So this is kind of like, if you ask me to draw a picture of myself, this kind of depicts who I am as a person. Maybe some bold eye to kind of like show the boldness, or what's my cultural background, where I'm coming from, and what's my mother tongue. So art can be used in different forms, and this is one way of my expressing who I am as a person. So we are looking into a lot of transformation into online platforms, right? Especially during the pandemic, we are all staying home, staying indoors. So these kind of online interventions can also really help, and especially to places where there's no access to mental health resources. So this particular intervention was developed by the Florida State University researchers to do, in fact, it is the first electronically delivered MBAT therapy in the phone. So only the first and the last session, they do an in-person session. After that, it's all the online. They use mindful practices, techniques like yoga and meditation, and also they use sensory experiences. So numerous studies have shown the psychological benefits of mindfulness-based art therapy, whether it's reducing traumatic stress or decrease symptoms of depression or increasing emotional awareness, increase self-acceptance, developing resilience, and improving overall well-being. So the main question is, how do we translate finding into action? I think, fortunately, I think this answers has been done by the previous speakers itself, how they've been implementing these kind of findings into the community setting, but I would also kind of give you some other examples of how these findings are translated into action. So first, we are going to look into the organizational setting, right? a lot of educational institutions have incorporated mindfulness into their programs. And this is one of the organization called Mindful Arts, which provides mindful educators to volunteer at an underserved San Francisco school. So what they do is, particularly the founder created this curriculum called Mindful Arts in the Classroom, which is like a 200-page curriculum that uses original stories, art activities, and fun games to teach mindfulness and social and emotional learning to kids. Because it's quite get complicated when we are talking about feelings with kids, right? So this could be an easy tool for them to really identify and explore their feelings, and also helps with their emotional regulation, self-soothing, and learn some easy technique from mindful practices. Then we are going into the community. I'm really happy that we already kind of like talked about it, about culture, how culture is important, because when we are thinking of creative arts, culture is intertwined, right? The product of the art, or art as a product, is coming from a culture. How we interpret an art form is also influenced by culture. And on the other hand, there's also an impact of culture on resilience, right? Because I consider resilience what we see as a very westernized concept, rather a white concept. I don't think we have really went into the cultural nuances behind resilience, because I remember Pandian talked about how we sometimes the use of drums, pare, right? Maybe I would like to give an example from my experience also. In our culture, maybe Siva or Pandian could be able to relate to it. We have something called opari, right? That is basically a song that we sing in a funeral houses, which is a form of lamenting, a form of grieving process. But it's not get the attention that it gets, or like how important is that for that particular community to come from a death of a person that they're close to or loved one. So that's why it's very important for us to really look into who are they, like what's their background, what's their community that they're coming from, what kind of best practices that we can get from this culture. So this is one of the example I'm pulling in, which is the Resilience Art Cards, which is basically a 50 art cards that designed by Indigenous women artists in Canada. So it serves as an educational tool to integrate Indigenous themes, knowledge, history, and contemporary realities into the classroom. So it's not just the concept of what the society is telling what resilience is all about, but this is also coming from the native knowledge and what type of coping tools that they have been practicing from generation to generation, and it's not just blurred or vague. So this kind of spark dialogues, questioning, critical thinking, and understanding. And I really want to underline, maybe this is one thing that you may be taking away from this presentation, because I feel like culture kind of gets lost in most of the scientific-based interventions or scientific papers. So this is something that we need to be really focusing on, because even in the youth population who are affected by the pandemic, we are seeing those people are coming from communities of color. We will not be able to serve them or like help them with the resilience and recovery if we don't understand these cultural differences or being sensitive to these their cultural backgrounds. Last but not least, individual level. So I feel like this was the very challenging level out of everything, because this is the level that we are ourselves making deliberate choices, what makes us happy, because we are living in a very fast-paced life. We are juggling with career, studies, family, but we often forget to take time for ourselves, what makes us happy. Even just 15 minutes of drawing. I think Kali nicely put that out, like writing poem. You don't need to be an artist to draw. You can just sketch, you can doodle. There are a lot of online apps coming. So it's just a way that you're taking a break from maybe like the outside stress, giving yourself some time to kind of engaging in such arts can help improve well-being, not just for an individual, but as a society overall. And then lastly, I would like to emphasize on the 3 I's, which is invest, implement, investigate. So invest, I think Anna talked about how research is being coming out of bucket, because most of the time creative arts doesn't get the attention that it needs to be getting, especially when we are thinking of resilience and recovery and how we are trying to improve the well-being of youth, there should be more research going on in this space, and also there should be more funding and investment that needs to be done. And also these research should not stop at a research level, but rather it should be implemented in the practical setting, whether it's educational or whether it's workplace or even at a policy level, it should be implemented. And also there should be continuous assessment of these programs, because at the end of the day, like, things are changing on a daily basis. We have to be updated with what we are using as a tool to serve this community. So we have to be constantly assessing what we are doing, what's its effectiveness, and what are some of the outcomes from the programs. So I hope that kind of gives some kind of a positive remarks for you all. Hope you enjoy. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Priya, for throwing a light on, particularly on resilience and recovery, using mindfulness and art therapy as a tool. And it's like a really, it connects all the dots of how the practitioners are putting things on the ground and how the researchers are working on the academic settings, and then how we can connect this together. And particularly your art pieces are awesome. And they were like, oh, like I have seen some of them on your website, but like a presenting and linking them with your presentation was really, really powerful. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you so much.
And also I need to highlight this also for like bringing a Wopari into the Wopari was one of the most powerful collective healing practices is practiced across India in a different forms. So, and often it's not really studied enough, and there is a need for bringing this kind of traditional. And the other things which I would like to emphasize is culturally contextualizing this work is very, very important. And the way you're connecting this Wopari for cultural contextualization, it's something's very unique way. We all need to take it from this presentation today. Thank you, Priya, once again. And I'd like to welcome Julie from Paris. Julie's been waiting for a long time to share this research outcome. She's been working on this for almost last 4 months, and she's going to present to us about a global mental health, a call for a local action. And welcome, Julie.
Thank you, Siva, very much for having me on this with these panelists and these colleagues. All your work is very inspiring, and it speaks to the levels of pain and healing as a universal experience, and art also as a universal language and a means of just transformative and powerful action. So I'm currently studying in the public health master's, so my perspective will be from a more global perspective. But my hope is to continue to bring importance of culturally adapted healthcare systems and mental health care around the world. And so I'll share my screen. Oops, 1 second. Excuse this little Zoom. We'd think after all this Zoom practice, we'd have it down, right? Okay, here it is. All right, perfect. So,
Julie,
some stats loud.
People are having trouble in hearing you. Yeah.
Is this better?
Yes, I guess.
Yes? Okay. Thank you for telling me, Siva. I appreciate it. So globally, 15% of the global population have mental health and substance use disorders, and that comes down to an estimated 970 million people worldwide. Within the share of the population, a little under 4% have anxiety disorders, almost 3.5% and 1.4% have alcohol use disorders. In terms of global burden of mental health disorders, major depression has moved from the 4th rank in 1990 to the 2nd rank in 2020, and self-inflicted injuries are 14th in the global top 15 disease burden. When it comes to youth, mental health disorders account for 16% of the global disease burden and injury for 10 to 19-year-olds, and is the 2nd leading cause for disease burden for 10 to 14-year-olds and the 11th for 15 to 19. Half of mental health disorders start before the age of 14, and suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death in 15 to 19-year-olds, while 1 in 7 adolescents experience mental health conditions, which means 175 million adolescents, which is an increase of 4 million since the year 2000. In terms of current global action, the World Health Organization has many programs to increase mental health care systems around the world. There's the Mental Health Gap Action Program, which is programmed to increase quality mental health services in low and middle income countries, and is a practical toolkit for community providers on strategies to prevent mental health disorders, promote mental health, and expand mental health services. The Mental Health Action Plan has 4 main goals. Its goals being leadership and governance for mental health, comprehensive and integrated community mental health and social care services, promotion and prevention strategies, and strengthened evidence and research for mental health. As of 2017, 177 countries report on progress of the implementation of the Mental Action Plan, which represents 97.5% of the global population. And as a 2021 update, the program has been extended to 2030. And this program also includes the Mental Health Atlas, which is a collection of data on country monitoring of implementation of the Mental Health Action Plan. And lastly, the Global Accelerated Action for Health of Adolescents is guidance to support country implementation to respond to adolescents' health needs, including mental health. And of course, there's many campaigns, of which the World Mental Health Day on October 10th and the International Suicide Prevention Day on September 10th. So in terms of my research with the committee, the objectives were to gather data on the prioritization of mental health policies and programs of UN member states, and to examine which regions have scarce mental health prioritization to strategically expand international collaboration for awareness surrounding mental health. And in terms of method, I used the Sustainable Development Goals, looked at SDG 3, which is for good health and well-being, and specifically at target 3.4, which is the goal to reduce by 2030 by 1/3 premature mortality from non-communicable diseases through prevention and treatment, and promote mental health and well-being. The indicator for this target is the suicide mortality rates. So it does not reflect the actual burden of disease and may include accidental lethal self-harm. However, it is used as a global indicator as it's easy to understand and one that is the most widely reported. I looked at the voluntary national reviews, which are part of the follow-up and review mechanisms to conduct regular and inclusive reviews of progress at the national and subnational levels. And these are all country-led and country-driven. I created a classification system based off of the voluntary national reviews, which included 3 groups. The first being mental health being prioritized by the countries, where the indicator is reported. There's clear national mental health policy or some focused on mental health policies campaigns, like aimed at youth, indigenous populations, LGBTQ populations. There's health budget allocated to mental health, and the intention of moving away from psychiatric institutionalization and moving towards community-based services. The classification for mental health mention is the suicide rate being reported or not. And if it's not reported, there's at least the mention of mental health legislation or policy. When mental health is not mentioned, the suicide rate is not reported, and there is no mention of mental health in the VNR. For health budget, there's no indication of increased budget allocated towards mental health. And lastly, I started to create in-depth country profiles that explain the cultural and context of these classifications. So in terms of numbers, I was able within 3 months to look at 30 countries. Of these 30 countries, 30% were high income countries and 12% were lower middle income countries. 5 countries mentioned mental health, and 16 countries, so over 53%, did not mention mental health in their voluntary national reviews. So now we're going to take a look at some examples. Australia prioritized mental health. Their voluntary review dates back to 2018, and they looked at it considering social and economic determinants of mental health through holistic and global approach of achieving the SDG and youth mental health services, health, and continues to increase its spending in mental health care. In 2018, 9.23% of the GPD went to health, and 7.81% of its health expenditure went to mental health. More specifically, in 2020 and 2021, the long-term national health plan for Australia, which is over 4 years, allocated 32 billion of its 115.5 billion Australian dollars to mental health, which equates to 27.8% of its budget, of which 5.6 billion Australian dollars will be to double the amount of psychological services for youth, COVID-19 mental health support, and trauma-informed mental health care to bushfire survivors. Moving on to mental health mentioned, Tunisia had the indicator suicide rate not reported, but there was a mention of a mental health promotion in their voluntary national review. Otherwise, their focus on the SDG 3 was on maternal child health and the eradication of communicable diseases. Thanks, Siva, for the heads up. And Tunisia did not mention their health budget. Lastly, for mental health not considered, we looked at China, which had no publicly available voluntary national review and focused their health targets on the reduction of maternal and under 5 deaths. And there was no report of budget allocation. However, there has been an increase in psychiatric beds between 2009 and 2018. Lastly, excuse me, there we go. In terms of just study weaknesses within the countries that I have studied, the 30 countries, they are non-representative so far of the UN member countries per region, and so that needs to be taken into consideration that Western European and Eastern European states are overrepresented, and African states, and Asia Pacific states, Latin America, and Caribbean states are underrepresented. Since this is the beginning stages of the research, the sample size needs to be increased in order to have the member states be well represented. And within this research, there can be language barriers when trying to find sources. In terms of conclusion, while local action for global change is quite important, I'll just go quickly through the advocacy campaign steps. First is to prepare and define our message, short-term and long-term goals, and consider the political climate of where we want to bring mental health advocacy. Then we need to consider the strategy. We need to think about which level we'd like to act on. So whether it's local, regional, provincial, or national, and communicate our message through media to policymakers by writing letters, using social media, getting the word out, whether it can even be through traditional newspapers. And finally, mobilizing others and creating trust, humanizing the story, using honesty and strength in personal stories. And I had some discussion questions on how we can coordinate local action to a larger scale to bring national and international action and advocacy. How do you think you can become involved in advocacy, increase your outreach, or empower youth towards mental health advocacy? And lastly, how do we reduce power dynamics and decolonize global mental health? So I'd like to thank you for your time.
Thank you, Julie, throwing some light on how member states are really prioritizing, and often they get to talk about it, but how really they are prioritizing and implementing things on their respective countries. And also it brings like a lot more consciousness to the committee as a whole, how we can prioritize our own advocacy strategy to re-emphasize the countries and member states and the ambassadors to engage actively on their mental health policy. And then it helps us to work more with member states actively, and we'll continue to do this research work. And thank you so much for presenting today. I've been talking a lot. I'm going to start talking, and let's open the floor for the audience. If you have any questions, any comments, or like sharing, please unmute yourself and speak, but one at a time. Who wants to go first? I hope Holly is unmuted. Holly, you want to say something? Yeah, please.
I was going to wait, but thank you all for these wonderful presentations. And I think that the link in terms of what Siva just said of providing a direction for this committee, I have goosebumps now to think about what we have to do. But I was really struck in a very sad way by something that Anna said in terms of Black youth organizing to transform the systems that traumatize them to increase their well-being. And it just makes me feel like, how can we leave it to them? I mean, obviously it's wonderful for them to do that, but what a betrayal generationally. And the notion that there's some reverence for ancestors who were such role models of spirit and courage and tenacity that they've passed on. But our generation, I think, has been so lax. And the idea of these youth having to transform the systems that we all helped create is heartbreaking. And if you look around, I've been very involved in the Middle East these last days. And if you just look at the suffering of young people, and whatever group, you could spin a wheel or do pin the tail on the donkey and just identify one group. But what we all have in common is our humanity and this very specific collective suffering and pain. And if we could only use that humanity to enlarge each group to the collective being fellow humans, we would make so much more progress in terms of enhancing post-traumatic growth. And I was very pleased when you said, no, resilience is not enough. It's a word that we've passed around a lot, but it's not enough to just bounce back. We have to improve the systems that have caused all of this pain and suffering. And instead of turning against each other, it seems to me our responsibility to help direct youth to uniting together and still retaining their own unique identity individually and culturally, but being able to transcend that at the same time to share humanity. And it's only going to happen I think, as you each pointed out, in being able to share stories, share narratives, and be more deep listeners so that we really can not just be preoccupied with our own story, but take in the experience of the other. And our responsibility as a committee to share all of that with the ambassadors, with heads of state, with policymakers and decision thought leaders, I think is really important. And that's why we need an intergenerational approach on the committee so that we can all do it together and really maximize and optimize each of our strengths collectively and individually.
Thank you, Harley, for bringing up this. This is very, very important element of intergenerational knowledge and resource transformation for collective action. If you don't have this intergenerational knowledge transformation, that's like something we need of the hour, even beyond the COVID or beyond the, like, if you want to achieve this, it's something is important. We need to come together on a table and where there's a equal space and voices for both the generations together to amplify our collective voice for global mental health and racial equity and social justice. And I want to give an opportunity to anyone else who would like to please unmute, and if you have any questions to any of our panelists, our comments, your thoughts.
I see. Also, Julie, I wonder if you've all alluded to internet and being able, especially during this challenging time, to use that as a resource to advance organization, to engage youth in these activities. But we need to think about lower resource countries, and internet accessibility is not universal, either because of diminished resources, or in the case of someplace like China, where it's severely limited and restricted. And as much as we admire what's being accomplished through the internet, I think we have to really, again, as a committee, work towards equalizing that opportunity, because that's the main issue of equity, is so many are left out. And we don't notice that, or we don't give it the attention that it deserves. And that's an aspect of justice that we can't continue to let fulminate, that kind of social injustice.
Professor Congress, you are trying to.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, I think everyone, one a second person, but what Holly said, I mean, definitely in social work, in my profession, we're real concerned about those who were left out. I mean, it's one thing to talk about equality, but we really have to think of equity. I mean, if everyone has an equal opportunity, and I think there are many people who are just deprived of technology. It's fine for us, we're on this Zoom call and we spend our life on Zoom, but many people are places that they don't have any electrical power even to use computers, and so really cuts them off. I also wanted to say about, I thought all your presentations are really good, but just, a couple of points. I think especially, was what Anna said about really listening to people, especially like young people, about where they are. And I think that's why your work has been so powerful, because, we kind of go in and we have these set ideas about how we can help them, right? And without kind of listening to who they are and what they're all about. And do they really need us to help them, or if they have kind of their own ideas about making their lives better? And I think we really need to, pay, much more attention to that, to kind of really realizing that each person really has a right to express like who he or she is and what he or she wants for the world, and to respect their right. instead of just focusing on they need this and they need that. And we, we in the helping professions always have ideas about how to meet people's unmet needs, right? But I mean, I think it's really important if we, begin with, such where we talk all the time about beginning with the client as we learn it in social work 101. And I think it's true in psychology too. It's like, one, and in nursing, right? It's 101, you begin with the client, but then sometimes I think we almost forget it because we develop all these elaborate programs for working for how we describe people without really listening to people themselves and who they're all about and what they want for themselves. So anyway, my takeaway from this.
Congress. And anyone else? We got another 3 minutes before we close the session. And if you miss this chance, like you can't get to ask more.
I would throw one idea out that I'm working on with this wonderful school in northern India, Akshar Foundation. And they're currently on lockdown again. And we came up with, I was having a phone conference and the director, Parmita, had to go because she had to communicate with some students doing a lesson. But very few of them have smartphones. And so they're isolated, they're withdrawn, they can't get to school. And I thought there are a lot of people who have discarded, unused smartphones here. If we could collect them all, and I have a shipper who I think will ship them to India. And if we could just collect them and send them, then it would provide, because even in places like in places I go to in Africa where they don't have, a healthy Wi-Fi electronic network, they do have solar connection. And I don't know, do you think that's a worthwhile idea? I'm just getting ready to start this among my friends and colleagues in a desperate attempt to be able to keep these kids connected with their teachers. But do you guys know people who have cell phones, smartphones they're not using? And we could just, it might be just a simple thing like that.
Challenge in that actually the customs doesn't allow the used any of the electronic goods to India. So we can't really transport like that. The customs will block it. And we need to think about that in terms of logistic side. And also like right now, there is like a very, very huge consignments is going across different parts for the COVID relief activities, and it will be really, really challenging sending any of the electronic items through any kind of shipment. Just for because I was trying to send some of the oxygen concentrators, and even that was not allowed. We need to do with through the local service provider there. So I've been very closely working with some of the service providers and organizations on this. So yeah, it's also time, and I'm mindful of time. And I would like to thank all the wonderful presenters. My gosh, this was a excellent combination of presenters coming together, putting the thoughts and ideas and research it's like putting like nicely together, and I just felt that it's a lot to work on this. And we have like a lot more responsibility as a committee to take it further and keep gathering this information and knowledges and putting and then keep advocating with the member states and trying to have like a sufficient policies and programs with sufficient resources within the member states to act in the respective countries would like really makes the this sessions more meaningful. And the current the COVID scenarios going on, we are consistently working on the ground with our local teams. If anyone would like to contribute or support, maybe I'll share the link to support any kind of contributions that can go for a COVID relief, emergency relief activities. You can support. And thanks all the participants and the NGO committee executives for your wonderful support, and all our panelists, and we'll keep you posted. This entire video will be uploaded on our YouTube for further disseminations. And thank you once again. And I'll stop recording and thank you.